How can we really improve the collaboration between the human translator and the language technologies?
The mistakes that the machine translation makes are getting more and more subtle, and they're harder to detect.
Google is now giving YouTubers early access to machine dubbing.
The localization market is an attractive one, powered by globalization and the emergence of dedicated new generation facilitators.
And welcome everyone to another Slater Pod episode. Hi, Esther.
Hey, Florian.
Before we get started, another urgent call to action to go to Clear Global's website. Former Translators Without Borders, they're already at the border area in Poland and in other countries that are bordering Ukraine as the war is now entering its second month. Unbelievable what's going on there. Terrible. So Clear Global have already translated over 1,000 words in 10 languages, they say, in the first 2 weeks. So, that's obviously going to be a lot more by now. They work with 100 linguists and they're ramping up fast. So huge need for assistance, for example, again, at the borders or in cities like Krakow, etc. So head over to clearglobal.org/donate, and if you haven't done so already. Today, Esther, we're going to talk about MT post editing in the guest segment. And we're going to look at it from a brand new point of view. You'd be surprised. Well, you're not going to be surprised, but all the other viewers and listeners are going to be surprised. So we're going to be talking to Nico Herbig, research engineer at Native.ai, and Joseph van Genabit, scientific director, multilingual technologies at the DFKI, the German Institute of Artificial Intelligence. I'm going to save my German pronunciation of that long word for the latter part of it. Cool. So we had SlaterCon last week. No massive recap we had in this episode. If you want to go, you can actually look at the whole thing. You can watch the whole thing. We have it in our video on demand channel. And so we already had a few people buying access to that. It's like our very own streaming services. So we had over 500 people, went super well, and on to the next one. Need to talk to Andrew when we're scheduling the next one. But we have to get going here, Esther, because we got a really packed agenda, and we're not even catching up on a week ago, right? So we got RWS, BoostLingo, Google launching some machine dubbing solution, DeepL, Weglot, Accolade. Yeah, and that's where we said, well, we probably have to pause.
Can go at double the speed.
Yeah, you can go double the speed. I think if you're on those audio podcast apps, you can actually go
1.5 times faster if you want to speed up the process.
Does anyone do that? I don't do that.
Speed up the news delivery. I heard of one person doing it just to be able to get through more podcasts.
But it's weird. I get through hours and hours of podcasts a week, probably I don't know, a lot. And I don't do that, but maybe I should. All right, let's talk fast. So the news from RWS this week, where to begin? So they unveiled a new strategy. They had a capital markets day. They lost $500 million in market cap. They outlined their kind of strategy and their growth expectations, and they bought a company.
We think we're having a busy week. They're also having a busy week.
Yes, indeed. So Ian L. Mokadem, the CEO of RWS, I think he joined in June 2021. So he had a busy week. So they basically announced an acquisition. So that's what we can say. They announced an acquisition. It's a company called Leoness, but the product is Fonto. Gotta admit, never heard of it. And it's a authoring kind of content tool. And let's just rattle through the financials. So it's a company based in, I'm blanking. Is it Netherlands or?
I think it's the Netherlands. Yeah.
It's the Netherlands, right? So a company that generating revenue of 5 million euros, profit of 2 million euros. RWS paid 10 times profit, so around 20 million, including earnout. I think they must have been, from what we saw on the website, SDL was a customer of theirs. So, getting more into that, they're probably going to add it to that Tridion division, the content side of things. Then RWS also announced, didn't announce. So they calculated all the analyst expectations for revenue and profit and gave us the average figure. And
They
so
do the consensus, don't they, between all of the latest and analysts' views.
yeah, so all of the for consensus is $1 billion in revenue in 2022 and $185 million in adjusted pre-tax profit. We're already converted this for your convenience into US dollars from British pounds. What was more important, though, that the shares took a beating on the day of these announcements because they also announced that the unitary patent is going to start potentially hitting them in their IP translation business, right? And I got to admit, we can't unpack the unitary patent in this podcast. It's a very complex topic. And I think there's also, it's not fully decided yet what exactly the impact's going to be. But
Yeah, or
basically,
when.
and when, yes, exactly when. I mean, it's been around. They've been flagging this as a risk factor since
6 years they've been talking about
since
it.
ever we started covering them, right? But now it's apparently happening, and that's going to wipe what is it, roughly $25 million of IP revenues are at risk, and roughly $8 million of EBITDA are at risk. So take those figures with a grain of salt, but that's what they apparently said. And so, yeah, that's a big-ish hit, even for a company the size of RWS. And investors didn't like that, right? They also probably didn't like the conservative nature of the forecast. RWS said they would grow by 4% organically in the next couple of years, and then 6% in the few years after that. So that's a relatively conservative outlook. Now, that said, the RWS still generates a lot of profit and, pays out steady dividends. And so when we spoke to our very own Andrew Smart, who used to be a stock market analyst, he said that, this is obviously something that kind of institutional investors and pension funds like. They like that steady stream of dividends. So that's giving a kind of a cushion to the share price in the medium to long term. But yeah, it was a brutal couple of days for RWS there. And then, we also attended the Capital Markets Day, which they hosted yesterday. So they spoke to all the analysts, investors for a full day or half day rather. So you had everybody from Andrew Brody to the new CEO, Ian El Mokadem, then Maria Schnell from the language services side, John Hart, regulated industry, Thomas Lubbard, language services, Mihai from Language Weaver, Mihai Vlad, Thomas again about Trados and Tridion, Christopher Levy about the M&A, Des Glass, who's retiring as a CFO, correct?
I don't know about retiring. Don't know. Is he?
Okay, he's leaving the company. You're right.
Yeah, I don't know whether he plans to, retire on a beach or dive into other things. But yeah, he said he's leaving.
He's leaving, yeah. So we're gonna provide some follow-up coverage for our subscribers on this. What was it, a 4-hour event, including analyst Q&A. So there was a lot to unpack, which we can't do in the podcast, but very interesting. That you could really see like how they diversified away from that IP business over the last 5, 6, 7 years. I also think that they're going to simplify the technology. I mean, obviously, it's now kind of an amalgamation of a lot of platforms they've acquired over the years. So they said they're going to focus on 3 platforms, really pushing that SaaS component of the business, kind of trying to become more tech. Yeah, and then I think, not sure, but it seems like the SDL business isn't doing super well. That's the impression that I got from this, kind of the legacy part. But we shall unpack that more for you. That is RWS Capital Markets Day, and we will provide some follow-up coverage for our pro subscribers. But before that, Boost Lingo, they announced some funding a month or 2 ago, and here they are buying companies already. So who were they buying, Esther?
Yeah, well, we're switching from sort of large translation UK-based RWS to tech interpreting and US-based Boost Lingo. So hopping across to different services and different part of the world. But yeah, Boost Lingo announced that they have acquired 2 companies, 2 interpreting focused companies. One being VoiceBoxer, which is a remote simultaneous interpreting interpreting provider, and Interpreter Intelligence, which is described as an interpreting management platform. But in particular, they provide scheduling technology, so sort of on-demand routing and scheduling for interpreting interpreters. So yeah, interesting. Two acquisitions, sort of a double whammy, and looking really at completing, I suppose, BoostLingo's offering among the various different modes of interpreting. So following this acquisition, BoostLingo now, or these acquisitions, BoostLingo now offers, or they own video interpreting, the remote video interpreting, phone over the phone interpreting, on-demand interpreting, and the remote simultaneous interpreting as well. So we spoke to the CEO of BoostLingo, Brian Forrester, who said, sort of explaining what at least the rationale behind the VoiceBox acquisition, said that we knew to remain competitive in an enterprise market, an RSI solution had to be part of our offering. So they obviously absolutely wanted to add that string to their bow as well. The CEOs of both companies will be staying on. So that's Connor Power from Interpreter Intelligence and Sergio Lorian from VoiceBoxer. Staying on with the company. The brands of both companies will be retained, at least in the short term. And BoostLingo told us that the longer term plan is to obviously incorporate the best of all three products into one mega interpreting offering. So interestingly, I mean, the LSPs remain the main focus and the client base for, and that has been historically the case for all three of those companies. But then you've also got sort of VoiceBoxer serving, they said, was Fortune 1000 companies, multinationals, global organizations. And Interpreter Intelligence has clients across healthcare, education, and the government sector, in addition to LSPs. So yeah, interesting sort of double whammy of an acquisition there, but makes a lot of sense, right?
Makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting that startups are now, companies we used to think of like 3-4 years ago as kind of pure startups, right? And that they're now out there buying companies. I remember visiting BoostLingo at their office in 2018, so it was really much a startup vibe back when we were in San Francisco. I think since they now moved to Austin, Texas. But yeah, no, it's, good company, good growth, good strategy. Now they brought on investors doing M&A. And if you talk to any LSP in the US, if they do interpreting, most likely they'll be, they work with what they all call Boost. Nobody adds the lingo. They all call Boost. We use Boost. That's what they say. Yeah, cool. Congrats to Brian and team. And, we'll be observing what's next. Now, on staying in California, but, in the broadest possible sense of the term, Google is now giving YouTubers early access to machine dubbing. So I think this is a bigger story than maybe that kind of appears on the surface. Yeah. Difficult to unpack. So basically they have an incubator, Google incubator called, what is it called?
Area 120. Yeah.
Area 120. And so it's Google's in-house incubator / experimental lab, where kind of Googlers are, what they say, provides a safe space to fail fast. But hopefully they don't fail.
Those were our words rather than Google's words.
Oh, they were, okay, those were our words. Got it. Okay, maybe the fail fast was somewhere, but yeah. So basically, incubator, you try an idea, you try if it flies, and then if it's successful, it becomes part of Google's kind of offering, right? Broader offering. So one example of that would have been Dialogflow, which is a chatbot development platform for chatbots and voice bots. So which launched as an Area 120 project, and I was kind of part of the whole Google Cloud kind of NLP offering. Back to machine dubbing. So a project called Aloud, main name being Let More People Discover Your Videos. It's run by, again, two former Googlers. Both are longtime Googlers.
They're still at Google, so they are still employed by Google but they've been there for ages.
Good point. Thanks for correcting that. Yes, by two longtime Googlers. And they started in April 2021, so yesterday.
last year. Yeah, look,
last year.
seems like yesterday.
And so what is it? Basically, they're building on Google's now really impressive kind of NLP technology stack, whatever the term is. And so it's a machine dubbing solution for YouTube videos. So you allow transcribe your video, you review and edit the transcription. So far, so unspectacular. We're using the script for this. It's an amazing tool. Then allow translates and dubs your video, and you publish the video, right? So it's a very simple workflow, all kind of within the Google, UI. So you don't have to leave anything, and it's free. That's the kicker, right? So it's free. It just, it helps obviously YouTube, because if you can enable creators by the click of a button and a little bit of light editing to, triple or get their like 10x the amount of versions they have of their video, that helps helps YouTube drive traffic as well. So when you want to sign up, it's not actually you can't sign up yet, so you have to sign up to an early access wait list.
Mm.
And then it requests like your country of residence, your URL of your YouTube channel. Broader implications here. I think it's really interesting that Google is pushing this now for commercialization. It's free. It's built on Google's NLP stack. And yeah, it does compete with offerings like Papercup, for example, who we had on the podcast as well, right? So it's the usual, like you're competing with Google scenario here, where this is squarely aimed at kind of that mass market. And since it's all on Google, it's very low friction for them to use. So let's see where that goes. Maybe you should sign up, although I'm sure that Switzerland's probably not in their early access list, not having hundreds of millions of people here.
You never know.
Just briefly, before this podcast, I joined a online / offline, it was a hybrid event, but I dialed in online, called Start Summit, a Swiss startup summit in St. Gallen. Hundreds of people there on live. And the very first speaker / fireside chat was actually Jaroslav Kudlowski from DeepL, the CEO of DeepL. So they basically kicked off the entire startup conference. But, Esther, I have to disappoint you. There was literally zero news from an industry perspective. I was expecting a scoop. I was expecting some interesting data points, breaking news. Not much. So, no, it didn't happen. So basically, it was 25 minutes of just very kind of, from an industry perspective, obviously this isn't aimed at the language industry. It's aimed at a much broader kind of startup audience, right? So they couldn't geek out on machine learning models. But even all that said, it was just, there weren't too many figures. They did disclose that they were profitable, that they highlighted their very strong growth despite having basically zero marketing, although that's changing, of course. Then they touched on that kind of instant success in Japan. They teased a couple new languages coming out in Asia with lots of speakers. So I'm not sure if they have Korean, but probably Korean's going to be next. Then I also learned that Yaroslav wouldn't stop his kids learning languages despite DeepL, because it's an essential skill to speak, another language. And then they talked a bit about kind of their tiered research program, like short, midterm, long term. So kind of tactical research, and then more kind of the long term, almost kind of basic research on NLP. But yeah, that's it. Not much else. Sorry. Just trying to get some exclusive information there. We did get, not exclusive, but right at the time they announced Weglot, interesting no-code website localization company out of Paris. What happened over there, Esther?
Yeah, this pretty interesting news. They have secured a 45 million euro investment from an investment firm called Partech, which is a sort of a technology-focused investor. So that's about $50 million that they've secured. This comes from Partech Growth, and I think the fund is like Growth Fund 2. But yeah, Weglot, like you said, no code website translation solution. So it's a SaaS model. You can pay monthly, yearly. It's got, powered by MT, which does the first pass at website translation. Plus it's got post editing features. So users can choose or order translators via the Weglot dashboard, or they can actually assign their own translators also, I think, via the dashboard. It's scaled. So it was actually founded in 2016. So what's that, sort of 6 years ago now? And they scaled to 10 million euros in annual recurring revenues by the end of 2021. They completed a smaller sort of $500,000 seed round in 2017. No other outside investment until the announcement today, which is, like I said, from Partech Growth. I mean, interestingly, we actually got some comment not only from the CEO of Weglot, Augustin Prot, but from Bruno Kremel, who is the general partner at Partech Growth. So he shared a little bit about the thesis and the rationale behind the investment in Weglot. So he was saying, talking about demand for website localization, saying there's a large and growing group of companies that require these localization services. But, the process is still quite painful, and it's currently not very automated and still quite heavily based on files and sort of, I guess, sending files.
You don't say.
You don't say. Yeah. Well, anyway, but he was also saying that so Partech has this his words, long-established conviction that the localization market is an attractive one.
Good.
Powered by strong tailwinds such as globalization and the emergence of dedicated new generation facilitators. And he gives the example of Shopify for e-commerce. And he said these help companies sell internationally earlier in their development, which, pretty interesting hearing from him. And he also sort of covered the fact that Partech has invested previously in a language company or an LSP called Worders. So that investment was made, I think, in 2017 via their seed fund. So he was sort of saying, well, the fact that they're investing again is obviously sort of highlighting, underscoring their conviction and belief in the attractiveness of the industry.
10 million euro ARR in those annual recurring revenues is quite strong, because they probably don't have a bunch of enterprise accounts. I would assume those are a lot of relatively small kind of websites.
They named some. So I think it's a lot of smaller mid-sized companies, but they named some sort of enterprise customers as well. Check that out in the article. And I think they've got a team of about 30 people at the moment. So scaling obviously to kind of 10 million on 30 staff members is pretty good going.
We should get them on the podcast. Monica, if you listen to this, let's get them on the podcast. Augustine and Remy. And now we're staying in the beautiful country of France, or even a beautiful city of Paris. Let's talk about Accolade buying Ubicus.
Yeah. Well, I feel bad that this is sort of the last thing, the last thing on our agenda, because I think in any other week this would probably have been, right at the top. But yeah, so news has been out for a few days now. Accolade has acquired Ubicus, two France-based LSPs. Accolade, already a super agency with around 260 million euros in revenues from in 2021. Ubicus, also sort of a sizable leader at 70 million euros in 2021. Second biggest French LSP, if you don't take into account some of the dubbing companies. But the deal closed on 17th of March. The Ubicus acquisition is, I think, Accolade's 10th acquisition to date. It's about half the size, or sort of considerably smaller than the Amplexor acquisition in 2020, but it's still obviously major news here. And it comes just really a few weeks after Accolade announced that they had completed the integration and sort of rebrand of Amplexor. So I think they're very much on to the next one now. But combined, the company will be around $360 million. So growing again into sort of a sizable super agency there. And they'll have around 2,500 employees. So we did talk to them, spoke about the business mix, which is sort of comprises mainly translation, interpreting, and transcription.
transcription, right? They did a ton of so Accolad's now in the transcription business, and a big part of it is transcription.
A big part of it is transcription. We don't know exactly how much on a percentage basis, but those three service lines, translation, interpreting, and transcription, now make up around 3/4 of the total company, i.e. Accolad revenue post-deal. We asked about transcription and sort of their Accolad's take on it, and they said we see strong potential for growth and also offers cross-selling opportunities. In terms of the kind of pure translation business, Ubicus is also, as many people will be aware, got its own proprietary neural machine translation, as well as speech recognition technologies. So I think you can expect to see sort of Accolad making use of that and offering that to clients. Yeah.
So, sort of positive. I mean, Vincent Nguyen, now we're going to learn, a former CEO of Ubicus, he was kind of a tech geek. I remember he explained at SlaterCon Zurich 2018 already. I mean, that was literally 2 years after NMT came out, right? He explained in detail how they were already building custom models, etc. So, yeah, that's a nice addition to Accolad.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, brand. They said the brand will stay on. The Ubicus brand will stay, at least in the near future, and they're working to sort of think about what the best long-term evolution and strategy is. As you mentioned, Vincent is leaving the company to engage in a new project, and the former group CFO of will be, so that's Guillaume Dumortier, will be stepping in as interim CEO, they said.
Well, lots of integration.
Lots of integration.
You got Amplexer, and then next you turn around, you buy Ubicus, and you get yourself a nice multi-million-dollar transcription line of business. So, yeah.
And some juicy tech.
And some tech. Yeah, talking about tech, we're going to head over and talk about hardware and post-editing and pens and just a very different way of thinking about post-editing. So stay tuned. And welcome back, everyone, to Slater Pod. Joining us today are Nico Herbig and Joseph van Genabit. So Nico works as a research engineer at Native.ai, and Joseph is the scientific director multilingual technologies at the DFKI, or Deutsches Forschungszentrum für Künstliche Intelligenz. Now I can, break up my German here. So the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence. And what we're trying to do here today is to discuss all things post-editing, MT, translation, in particular, a project called MMPE, a multimodal interface for post-editing MT. And we're excited to get started. So first, Joseph and Nico, where does this podcast find you today? What city, what country?
Sure. So I'm in Saarbrücken here in Germany. It's in the southwest, close to Luxembourg, Strasbourg, so almost France.
Yeah, and the same for me. I'm actually in home office because of Corona, and it's kind of like getting better, but most of the time we still work from home, do the lectures, the meetings, etc.
Can you tell our listeners a bit about your background, how you got into the language industry? Perhaps let's start with you, Joseph.
Oh, that's a long story. When I was young, there was no such thing as natural language processing. At least you couldn't do courses in natural language processing. So my first degree is electronic engineering and English. And I tried to put the two things together, and that's how it all started. And I was very lucky. That was in Germany, and I was very, very lucky. I got a scholarship to go to the UK for a couple of years, was able to do my PhD, came back to Germany, worked as a postdoc in Stuttgart, then spent lots of time in Ireland, in Dublin. I spent 17 years in Ireland, Dublin City University. And now I'm back in Germany for, I think, about 8 years.
Yeah, for me, the story is not as long as Joseph. So I was doing my bachelor's and master's, both in computer science. So I don't come directly from the language industry. And then I started my PhD at the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence at the chair for human-computer interaction, but co-supervised by Joseph. So basically, it's a combination of HCI and NLP. And that's also what the project was about.
Yeah, we really needed that for this project because it's so much about the collaboration between humans and computers. And our area of expertise, like in the multilinguality and language technologies, is the language technology bit. But of course, Nico's expertise and Antonio was the other supervisor, Antonio Kröger. He's actually the boss of DFKI, and his area of expertise is really human-computer interfaces. So we're very lucky to be able to put those two things together.
Hey, Joseph, just quick going back to the Dublin time. So that university is very, very active generally in kind of machine translation, NLP, right? Still
Very
is.
much so. Andy Way is a colleague from Dublin City University, and Chun Lu as well. Chun is now head of NLP research in Huawei in Hong Kong. Was a colleague of mine, and you've come across the ADAPT Center, and the first version of the ADAPT Center was called CNGL, Center for Next Generation Localization, and I was the founding director. So I put that together with colleagues, and then I left, went back to Germany, and CNGL turned into ADAPT, and it's now led very, very successfully by Winnie Wade at Trinity College Dublin, and by Andy. Andy is the deputy director of ADAPT, and they're doing really, really well. It's amazing.
How did the FKI get you back to Germany?
Oh, it was just like, I don't know. I think it was a nice opportunity, and I had to convince my wife. Mary is from Dublin.
17 years is a long time.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, she misses Dublin a lot. It's like Saarbrücken is lovely, but it's not a capital city. And yeah, no, we go back to Ireland and see the colleagues and the friends. We're lucky in that respect. But it's nice. I mean, the DFKI is sort of like, was one of the oldest research institutes in artificial intelligence. And I knew the former director quite well for this particular group. There are lots and lots of labs, and it's not just in Saarbrücken. It's in a couple of sites across Germany. And yeah, it was a good possibility at the time. And yeah.
Well, so yeah, let's dive into talking you a little bit more about the project. So MMPL, can you tell us, Nico, what that is in a nutshell and what the reason was in particular for starting the project?
Yeah, well, the reason was that if you look at research on NLP or language technologies in particular, great tools are developed every year and presented at the conferences. But what's often missing is the integration with humans. So like studies on how do humans use those technologies, right? And how can we really improve the collaboration between the human translator and the language technologies, right? Often you just see technical evaluations, or these tools are just put somewhere in a sub menu in an existing CAT tool, right? And we thought, okay, let's take those two perspectives, so like the human-computer interaction perspective and the MT perspective, and try to put together something great that enhances the collaboration.
But tell us more about the thing MMP, right? It's a hardware device, or it's got a hardware angle, which we've barely ever covered on SlaterPod and generally on Slater. So just tell us, for those that are only listening to this on the audio feed, because we're probably going to edit like a visual in, but just tell us more about that.
Yeah, so basically the idea was that, when you switch to post-editing from normal translation from scratch, your interaction patterns change quite a lot, right? Mouse and keyboard, they were developed for producing text. So if you start with an empty text box and you type your text, and for that, mouse and keyboard are great tools, right? No concerns about that. But in post-editing, the machine does the first draft, right, and you edit it. And the question is, are mouse and keyboard still good tools for that? And that was basically the core question we were asking. And therefore, we explored other interaction modalities. So, people get more used to this stuff anyways from their smartphones with touch, from tablets with a pen, right? Speech interfaces with Alexa. So we have all of these tools in our daily lives. And therefore, we thought, okay, let's try that out for post-editing. And also a bit more fancy stuff like hand gestures where you operate like that, or eye tracking, right? So we also explored these things that most people don't know. And of course, the combination of all those different things. And this means that overall, we had to also, not just change things on the user interface side, but also on the hardware side, because otherwise you cannot explore all of this.
And you mentioned that, things like the the interaction with between humans and language technology maybe hasn't been a major focus in the past. But what kind of impact do you think that's had? For example, are there things that you think are less than ideal in the way that some of the post-editing machine translation processes happen today? I mean, Nico, and I'd be interested to hear from Joseph as well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think, MT is produced. So it basically starts from the beginning. MT is produced with the goal of getting as close as possible to a reference translation, right? So here already the models are optimized to produce text close to a reference, not really close to something that is easy to post edit, right? So this is like one angle you could take, right? Can you create MT output that's easier to post edit, right? As long as you still need post editing, and I guess that will be a very long time if you look at all the complex text around there, complex language pairs where there's just not enough data and so on, right?
That what Nico said. So one of the reasons why we did this was that machine translation is getting pretty good, at least between some language pairs and where you have enough training data. But it still makes mistakes, like human make mistakes. And if you really need, if there's a lot of value in the translation, you need to rely on this, then you need a professional human in the loop. Because the mistakes that the machine translation makes are getting more and more subtle, and they're harder to detect. Like in the old days, there was lots of agreement errors or some reordering or something like this. But sometimes now with neural machine translation, it looks perfect, but it isn't. And that's one aspect. So we need post-editing, and we need to support that. We need to support that really, really well. And we need to support that in such a way that it's geared towards the human in the loop, the human expert. And as humans, if we communicate with each other, we don't always use keyboards and mouse. We speak, we gesture, we do lots of things. We use vision, eye contact, and part of the project was how can we best support all these multimodal ways of interacting with humans, or with a human and a machine, or human and content. How can we make that available? And there was research in the past, and really, really good research, like eye tracking research and other research on using pens, for example, electronic pens to post edit, etc. But it wasn't really sort of like all brought together in one place, and these interaction modalities. So maybe, often we use different modalities at the same time. We speak, we use gaze, we might point at something, we might touch at something. And part of the project was to look at the individual interaction modalities on top of, and that's why it's called multimodal, MMPE, multimodal post-editing, in addition and on top of the mouse and the keyboard, but not throwing this away, because mouse and keyboard are incredibly useful for many things. But they might no longer be optimal for the modern task of post-editing high-quality machine translation output. And so we looked at the individual interaction modalities, we looked at some of the combinations. And I think one of the things that was really important, and that came from Nico and the human-computer interaction side, was that from the very beginning, from the word go, we had human translators in the loop. Initially we had no idea about what should these interaction modalities be like, or what do human translators, human professionals, what do they think? Of course, they have years and years of experience with the mouse and keyboard, and it's very hard to wean them away from this. But we started with questionnaires and with experiments, sort of mock-ups, and Nico conducted all of this to look at okay, here's a couple of tasks that are supposed to be that you're supposed to be doing in post editing. If you could just imagine, and you have all these modalities, how would you do it? And that was I think that was one of the first steps.
Yeah, exactly. So we started with elicitation studies, is what it's called, right? So really you try to elicit ideas from the professionals, because of course we know what interaction modalities could work, but we don't know, the language, so the translation task that well as a professional translator, right? So we went to professional translators, talked to them, and really discussed all ideas ranging from eye tracking through gestures, through just speech. They could imagine speech quite well because most of them have used it in some CAT tool, right? But once you got them more familiar with the other ideas, right, they also started to really love the pen, for example, right? So they really said, okay, that would be a great option, right? And also the combination, of pen and speech. So by basically marking something and saying, move that to the end of the sentence, all right? So that you don't need to do everything, but you can distribute across modalities how the interaction should work.
I think those early interviews, they really narrowed down the design space. They gave us really strong signals of what the professional translators thought were good interaction modalities, combinations, etc. So we didn't start with a sort of like a blank I don't know, you say like a blank blackboard or
Blank slate.
yeah, exactly. We didn't start from scratch, so it was very very much informed by these experiments, by these studies and the questionnaires, and evaluating them and seeing like what do they really want, and that then led to the first implementation.
And also to the first choice of hardware, right? I mean, since they were very eager to try out, handwriting, it was important that you don't handwrite in the air like that. You don't do that all day. You get the so-called gorilla arm syndrome, right? No one can do that the whole day. So it was important to have the screen that you can put on the table flat, right? And also move up and so on. And that's where hardware came in, and all the little design decisions, which pen, which display, and so on. Still, we try to implement it very generically, so that it also works on other devices, right? You don't need that hardware. But yeah, for our studies, we chose then a big screen that you can put down a headset so that the audio quality is good and speech recognition. You can directly, move things around also with your finger. We used a Leap Motion camera to detect finger movements, right? An eye tracker that detected where you're looking at, and so on. So we plugged all of this together and created the different interaction modalities.
So the technology is very generic in both hardware, but also the software. There was a lot of software to integrate this behind the scenes. There's a front end, a really nice visualization, which is also a couple of novel aspects, and a really, quite an amazing back end that is running behind the scenes that puts everything together. And I think one of the important things was also there were many dimensions to this work. So once the prototype was up and running, of course, we could test it and evaluate it, go back to the design board and change things and adapt things. But one important aspect was also we tried to measure cognitive load, and that's really hard. And the idea was, so one of the guiding principles was to come up with designs and solutions that help to ease cognitive load.
Okay, so like we have on the one hand, we have this input and interaction side that we just talked about. And on the other side, we also tried, passively monitoring the user to understand, what's going on, right? I mean, so it's quality and cognitive load are also not the same thing, right? A sentence can be very badly translated by the MT, but if it's a very easy sentence, changing it, so fixing the errors is very easy. On the other hand, it can be something that's already very close to the reference, but finding that error and finding the spot where it goes wrong can be hard. And therefore, we also tried out very many physiological sensors. So like, again, eye tracking for pupil diameter and also blinks. So how often do you blink? But then lots of, skin conductance measures where you have like a smartwatch that measures, like your conductivity on the skin. So if you're sweating, basically, exactly.
Yeah.
And then different, heart sensors that also measure, the heart rate variability and just normal heart rate and all of that. And again, there we try to, get better approximations of cognitive load by combining and fusing those different modalities.
That's
No pressure for the translator. You're sitting there like every blink of your eye, every perspiration is getting measured. It's like, I shouldn't think about that sentence too long.
absolutely, Florian. Yeah, I mean, there was even sort of like face recognition in some of the experiments. So to try to see like, are you like, I don't know, your eyebrows and things like this. But this was really just, so the idea is not that while you're interacting with an MMPE or you're wired up to all of these things, this was really like to guide the development and to see to what extent is it possible. It's really hard, like Nico said, it's really, really hard to measure cognitive load. And the idea was to get as many signals as possible. like the way how you sit. So one of the signals was like a posture. Is that the English? Yeah.
Yeah,
So if you
so
sit like
posture
this
detection. So
or
if you
like
come closer to
that,
the
or
screen, right?
yeah, like this, you probably that's an indication maybe of like, you're stressed or there's something really difficult. And yeah.
Do you think that, I mean, you're doing so many things that like the conventional startup or like the conventional kind of big enterprise company that's, coding software wouldn't do? Do you think, I mean, like, is there any chance you'll commercialize this? Do you have any plans to commercialize this? And then the second question is the reason why nobody's really tackled this, as far as I see from the private sector, because you're pulling so many kind of original thoughts and angles into this right now? Convoluted question, but commercialization, and why hasn't anybody done this before? Because it's like literally $1 billion market, right?
Yeah. So commercialization, I mean, was a publicly funded research project, right? So I mean, one of the aspects is to also try out things that might be a long shot, right? So that are not directly where you don't see the money coming in directly, right? But rather things that are cool and you want to try out and you want to see, do they work or don't they work?
Yeah.
And that's why we also tried, more fancy stuff like gesture interaction. And regarding commercialization, I mean, so we are not commercializing this, but we hope that ideas from it get commercialized. And here, again, I think you need to, again, distinguish things like, I think eye tracking. Not many people have eye trackers at home. This is probably not a good market to commercialize right now, right? Same with, gesture detection. But honestly, I think like pen interaction, so many people have iPads with a pen at home, right? And the more you do review, right? So, I mean, you can review other translators' work, but also like the machine translation in the form of post-editing. And yeah, the better MT gets, so the less changes you need to do, the more important those interaction modalities will become.
Yeah.
And pen is something that really like commercial tools could implement. Or also what participants liked a lot was reordering just by grabbing the words and moving them somewhere else, right? This is very complex to achieve with mouse and keyboard, right? You need to mark things, cut them, paste them, and so on, right? Compared to just, dragging it somewhere.
Yeah.
And those are things that, of course, could be implemented and commercialized. And speech actually is currently being commercialized at quite many CAT tools, right? It's gaining more and more popularity.
This is really like basic research, and we're looking into the future. It's maybe the future of post-editing, or some of it is the future of post-editing. But some of the things, as Nico said, are really close to commercialization. Speech, for example, speech in combination with other modalities, and there are good reasons for this. So if you type and use the mouse the whole day, then carpal tunnel is one of the sort of like, it's one of the professional injuries almost, like in the profession, if you're typing all the day. But if you have a chance to switch modalities, then that's really, really cool. It might actually also help you to move a bit, and you use gestures, etc. So I think there are plenty of possibilities. But this really was a basic research project, and with the funding comes, because the funding is public money, all the results have to go back to the public. And there's a GitHub where you can download the software and the configurations, etc. And this is really an invitation to other people to continue the research and to play with it, and maybe also to get inspiration for commercial undertakings.
And so when you were workshopping the ideas and generally creating MMPE, was it restricted to certain language combinations and certain text types? And what have you observed around how well it works for different settings?
Yeah, so we focused on English to German text from the news domain, so that it's pretty generic, right? Why did we do that? Well, it was hard to find enough participants anyways, right? And if you limit that down to some narrow domain that not many people are experts in, or some language pair where not so many translators are around, it gets harder to find participants. So that's why we try to stay pretty generic there and use something that we could find translators easily in German.
Yeah, there are many publications that came with the Okay, I think there was a little glitch here. There were many publications that came with the project of the research results, and for most of the publications, we involved working closely with professional human translators as evaluators, guides, etc. And as Nico said, like, that was the natural. Like, it's most easy to find German-English, English-German translation here in Germany. And in a couple of cases, we involved. We weren't able to involve professional translators, but we involved translation students, like master students who are in the final year. They're kind of like professionals in training, and they're pretty close to being professionals. But we only did that where we couldn't actually get the human professional translators involved, and that was partly in the final part of the project because of Corona.
That depended on, was hardware required? If so, we did it with students. If no hardware was required, so if we were exploring other things that were purely on the interface side, we were doing it online with freelance translators, but professionals. Yeah.
Did you look at how like modality may influence, I don't know, creativity or different approaches to translation solutions? Like I'm just picturing myself, instead of like being glued to the screen with the mouse and just fixing the segments, I'm actually like, looking at like a tablet with a pen. I could imagine myself coming up with other better, more creative, maybe translations. Was that part of it at all? Like the quality element, maybe?
So it's a very, very good question. I mean, of course, we did analysis in many regards, but no, not regarding creativity. We were mostly focusing on really comparing the different modalities or modality combinations. So we were measuring how long does it take and how do they like it if they added a segment with pen. How is it with touch? How is it with pen and speech combined? How is it only with speech? How is it only with gestures? How is it with mouse and keyboard? So those were the kind of things we compared. So really like a very, very narrowed down comparison, because we wanted to measure times, right? We wanted to measure subjective feedback on each of those interaction modalities. But it's a very good question, very good point. Is there an impact on creativity? Could be, I hope.
Yep.
But I can't say.
Research, well, as Nico said, was very much focused on very specific questions. So one of the things that we wanted to know is if the interaction involves changing text or just moving it, like not changing text, actually adding text, producing text, versus just like identifying something like maybe with a gesture, marking it, and then moving it by touching the screen or by gesture or by a command. And it was also part of the research was to see how the different modalities and their interactions distribute over those tasks, because some modalities are more suited for text generation. So, for example, you might dictate text. Or something like this. If you reorder, it might be easier to just touch it, identify a span, and then with your finger move it on the screen, and it reslots back into a new environment, etc. And there was some really interesting findings, like which modalities map well onto which interactions, and which modality combinations map well onto which interactions. But I think dictation might be. This is really like projecting into the future and speculating, because we didn't measure creativity. But it's an extremely good point. But I think sort of like to a hunch would be that if you're just constrained to the keyboard and the mouse, then you're likely to be conservative with respect to effort that you put in. You don't want to retype the whole sentence. If you get a reasonable translation by changing two things, it's also economical. Often human professional translators are under enormous pressure, especially with post-editing, because they have to fulfill a quota, do that much text. But maybe with speech recognition, and this is just a guess, maybe with speech recognition you're more likely to dictate like a new version of the sentence, and because it's easier than typing like the whole thing. But that is speculation, and that's a really interesting point that you raised, and this might be, I don't know, it's a pointer to the future and should be investigated.
Have you gotten any feedback so far from any kind of commercial organizations or maybe fellow researchers when you presented the paper? What was kind of the general feedback here?
Good. I mean, like I think the presentations, if you see the videos, there's lots of wow effect. If somebody just gestures, like, you're in front of the screen with your hands, you identify a span like this, and then you grab the span, you move it around, you release it somewhere else. That's just really, really cool. Or speech interaction, or these modality combinations, or, with a pen, you just write on the screen, like traditional copy editing. Or what people are trained with, and the speech, there's handwriting recognition, and it inserts it creates the spaces automatically, rearranges stuff. That's really, really cool. There's a lot of, like, if you see the videos, they're quite stunning.
Yeah, we'll add them for the YouTube viewers.
Regarding handwriting, what was also interesting for handwriting, I found, was that professional translators initially all thought, if I can do handwriting, I'm gonna handwrite almost everything. I'm gonna handwrite a lot, right? And it turned out to be very, very useful if you do small changes, if you delete a word, if you exchange a word by another word, if you reorder. So for these changes, it was very good. But as soon as you needed to write multiple words, right? So like longer texts, then definitely speech and the keyboard were just much, much better, much faster.
Yeah.
So this is also where the different advantages come in, right? So for reordering, pen is great and touch is great. And speech is not really good, and mouse and keyboard are also not so good for reordering. But when you want to add something, those things really get great.
Yeah. The freedom that you have, people can avail of different modalities and whatever works best for them. And a lot of the experiments showed that depending on the task, the new modalities are competitive. They're really, in terms of time, Nico said that often we measure time, doing it the old way, doing it in different ways, the new ways. I think the research really opens up many different ways of doing the same thing.
No, I agree. I mean, I find it so interesting because it opens up a completely new area that I personally haven't thought of, right? I mean, we're so stuck in it's a keyboard, it's a mouse, and it's like we feel pioneering if we maybe go beyond the segment level, right?
Absolutely.
For the translator. But if you go actually different modalities, I think I can see like a future, like in 10 years, we're like, okay, you literally you have that, iPad thing or device on you, and you just kind of very creatively work with it instead of like being stuck in that old mode.
Yeah, absolutely. And our experimental results are outcomes that were achieved with our subjects having sometimes 20, 30 years of classical, training with keyboard and mouse. And it's not easy to undo this. And even in this sort of like really strong competition where you're competing with like muscle memory that has been trained for decades in some cases, but also with the younger translators. I mean, the standard thing is really like keyboard and mouse. And if your experimental results show really good results and you're competitive, sometimes even faster for certain things, that's a good achievement. So I think it's really like a glimpse into the future. So we're hoping, at least.
Well, I mean, talking about glimpsing into the future, is there anything, any more steps to come with MMPE? Is this as far as the project goes? I mean, do you expect anyone to kind of pick it up and run with it and develop it further?
Yeah. So the project has ended, unfortunately, but also fortunately. Like, Nico is now defending his PhD, and he's part of a really new, exciting company that also does lots and lots of lateral language processing. Might be something for you to look into, but in a completely different area. But I guess that's for Nico and you to have a chat sometime. And that's a startup actually here in Saarbrücken, an extremely successful startup. And but for MMPE, we're hoping to continue it. So one dream is, I mean, you've probably heard about these brain readers. You wear a cap, and that's hard. But maybe there's a place for it in post editing or for something. And in addition to other modalities, it's something that we haven't explored. I think eye tracking. Like in the original MMPE, one of the things that we wanted to do is, the eye tracking shows you where you're looking at the screen. And in tandem with speech recognition, with automatic speech recognition, the eye tracking might prime the speech recognizer. It's because you're likely to talk about something that you're looking at. And usually the gaze is a few microseconds before you actually say something. And that's enough time to to maybe prime or tune the speech recognizer to get better recognition rates. And so there are plenty of possibilities. Like, I think I think we opened up like a small Pandora's box, and hopefully more good stuff is going to come out. We don't know yet. Yeah.
Call to action to the research community.
Yep.
Continue from here.
So there was lots of things, and actually also I finished my PhD thesis with lots of open research questions as well, because basically, right, I mean, we tried out so many things, and you could now dig into each of these in much more depth, right? So lots of small side things. We also tried to combine it, with interactive post editing. So basically the MT reacting to your changes again, right? Because I think then also if you consider a tablet and you have a pen, right, and you just do one small change somewhere, then the whole thing readapts. I think this will also become very, very useful, because then you basically never need to do lots of writing. But just small changes here and there. And like this combination of the modalities with such interactive post editing is also something that I would have loved to look into.
But you did not, right? Because I mean, this, like the interactive part, I mean, I always love interactive, because it's like, I think that's how it's supposed to be. Like, you change something and then the MT changes.
So we did some first pre-studies where we also, what I personally like a lot is, the DeepL way, where you click on a word and you get some n-best list of alternatives. What I don't like about it is, for example, that you don't know the impact of clicking on one of these suggestions, right? Sometimes you click on something and it just exchanges the word by a synonym. Sometimes the whole remainder of the sentence is changed, right? And we also tried different visualizations for that, right? So that we see those three options basically are something that will just do a synonym change. Others will be like a minor change that changed 3 or 4 words, right? And others will be big changes. And if you combine that then with a pen, right, or just finger touch, I think you would.
So the idea is that the system gives you an indication of the potential impact of a change. So it tries to predict that, not just give you the different options, but say if you click here, okay, all hell is going to break loose. And if you click on that one, it's just going to change the word. That's the idea. There was a master thesis on this. Yeah.
Well, so again, call to action to researchers both from private sector and academia. This is very exciting research direction to look into. So if anybody's listening or watching, please continue that and let us know. So Nico, Joseph, thank you so much for joining us today on SlaterPod. It was super interesting having you here today. Thank you.
Ersetze welche durch die. Füge welche vor früher ein. Lösche. Wege vor zurückzukaufen.
In this demo, I'll show you how can we use mid-air hand gestures for post-editing of machine translation. We'll start first with the setup, and then we will see how can we perform insertion or reordering, replacement, and so on and so forth on a single and a group of items. The setup consists of a leap motion controller above the keyboard, and here we have our keyboard. On the right hand side we have a wireless mouse. This is our NUC computer, and this is our editor interface. To insert a new item, simply point your right hand index and then keep moving your hand until you reach the target place. Once you are in target place, move your hand away, and then you can type in with the keyboard. To delete a single item, simply point with your right hand index to move your cursor on the item, and then 5 fingers extended, move your hand up or down will delete it. To select a group of items, point both of your indices, and then based off your hands levels, if it's at different levels, select multiple lines. If it's in the same level, we'll select on the same line. To delete a group of items, after you select them, move your hand up or down. To replace a single item, you can simply perform deletion by placing your cursor on the item and then move your hand up or down, and then type in with the keyboard. To replace a group of items, select these items, and then once you select them, you can either delete them by moving your hand up or start typing with the keyboard. To reorder a single item, first you have to place your cursor on the item and then form a grab with your left hand and keep moving until you reach your target place. Once in target place, close your right hand to drop the item. To reorder a group of items, select the items you would like to reorder, and in similar way to single item reordering, you form a grab with your left hand, and then you can move both your hands or only the right hand until you reach the target place, then close your right hand to drop the item.